a prophet has no honor in their hometown. And this is a very practical chapter about when you're trying to start a ministry, where you live or where you grew up, and some of the challenges that you'll face in doing so. I really enjoyed writing that chapter. Chapter 6 is called I Am Barabbas, and I proffer a beautiful theological and Christological thesis in that particular chapter, and I suggest that me and you, we are much like Barabbas, that criminal that was let go when Jesus died in his place. Chapter 7 is entitled What the American Church is Not Building, and fortunately, its disciples. The church needs to build disciples. Chapter 8 is something that I'm very familiar with. As I mentioned in the first YouTube video, I am a trial lawyer and also a pastor. I've handled hundreds of cases of institutional abuse, sex abuse with churches, schools, and daycare centers. And I wrote a chapter on that subject. And I entitled that chapter, The Dirty Little Secret of the American Church. You'll be amazed at how much sex abuse is going on in not only the Catholic Church, but also the Protestant Church in America today. It's something that has to be stopped. Chapter 9 is an interesting chapter, very theological, very Christological. It's entitled What Christians the Christian Church Owe the Jews. And this was originally a paper I had written at Princeton for Professor George Hunsinger. He had written a paper, and this was in response to his paper. And I took a little bit of a different position. It relates to the concept of supersessionism and as to whether or not the Christian church has replaced Israel in the promises of God. And so you'll be interested to read that article. And I made a link in one of the footnotes that if you want to read Professor Hunsinger's most excellent article on supersessionism, you can link to that and read that also, and then read my chapter, which is really a response to his paper, and that's chapter 9. Chapter 10 is another paper that I wrote at Princeton. It's entitled Between a Rock and a Hard Place, The Mediation of Moses, Old, and Christ, New. This was a paper that I had written while studying under a rabbi at Princeton Theological Seminary in a class that was entitled A Closed Reading of the Book of Exodus. And so hopefully you'll enjoy reading about mediation and the role of mediator and how significant the role of mediator is in the life of the church. Chapter 11 is a chapter entitled If Christ Had Not Come. And what I proffer in that chapter is looking at the world if Christ never came into the world. What would the world be like? And then I also look at it, but he did come into this world, and how could that affect and change your life because of Christ? Number 12, chapter 12 is also a paper that I had written at Princeton Theological Seminary. And this was a very, I think, important paper, and this is an important chapter. Professor Darrell Guder was one of the most significant theologians in the world as it relates to missional hermeneutics. He had coined that phrase. I remember sitting in Princeton and being in one of the classrooms, and Professor Hunsinger was telling us a story that he was at the dinner table with his good friend and neighbor, Professor Darrell Guder, and they were talking about the mission of the church and what the church's role is and should be in society and culture today. And they came up with the term missional hermeneutics, and that became an area of study. And Darrell Guder was one of the fathers of missional hermeneutics. And in that, the title is Missional Objectives of the Authentic Church, the Poor, Homeless, Displaced, and Aliens. And I address how the church ought to respond and react and care for the homeless, the poor, the displaced, and the aliens. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of room in the budget of many churches in America to do that. But I suggest that the authentic church must care for the poor and the homeless and the displaced. And I wrote a paper on that, and I hope you enjoy that in chapter 12. Chapter 13 is a very encouraging chapter. It's a very short chapter, but it's entitled The Mustard Seed Principle of Building a Ministry. And in that chapter, I'll demonstrate to you that you can use the resources that you have available to you now to start a ministry. It doesn't have to be big. It could start small. It can start in your house. It can start in a room. It can start with one or two people, friends and family. But you begin something, you start something. And that's the the principle that underlies this book. This is a book on practical theology, how we could implement and expand the kingdom of heaven here on earth now with the resources that we have. And then chapter 14 is basically a how to get your ministry and obtain tax-exempt status with the government. We show you how to navigate legally to get it approved as a 501c3 exemption. And then there's a brief epilogue at the end. So that is the outline of what I propose to do in this YouTube channel. And if you have questions on any of these chapters or some of the things that we talk about, and you have a question or a comment, or when the book is going to be available, you can email me at Robert Fuggi, RobertFuggi 1, the numeral 1, at gmail.com, and I'll get back to you. Thank you. God bless you all.